Hi, class, and welcome to our online version of media. Research class. And today our discussion is going to be on surveys, putting numbers on opinions. So let's start with the first slide. What is a survey? Most of you have participated in a survey and have designed a survey before, so you may already know what a survey is. I'm just going to give you a short definition of what a survey is. It's a series of formatted questions delivered to a defined sample of people with the expectation that their responses will be returned somewhere between immediately and within a few days. So the reason why we do use surveys is because they are often used in communication research for reasons of speed, coverage, and cost effectiveness. So one of the reasons why this method is taught in this communication research class is because students are going to be able to design their own survey and then send them to their to the people that they know, and then respond quickly. And in that sense, you will be able to reach a big sample size, and at the same time, it is cost effective. You do not have to actually spend money to receive response from your respondents. And how do we start a survey? Well, it begins with theoretically or pragmatically driven research questions or hypotheses, and continues through question wording, formatting, and ordering, getting questions to respondents, collecting answers, and analyzing and reporting answers. So, when you want to start a survey, which is basically the kind of method that I'm going to ask you to do for your second method project, what you need to do is actually formulate a research question first. So just like when you're formulating a research question for your content analysis paper, in this one, the kind of questions that you're going to ask has to be the kind of questions that a survey will be able to answer. So if you're going to ask a question about, for instance, what is the cause of depression for college students who are taking courses more than 20 credits, for instance, we do not know. We cannot, actually make that causation or that relationship that say that there is this causal relationship between this and that. So instead, the kind of questions that you can formulate for survey questions is a pretty straightforward questions. And we are going to actually develop a more detailed guideline on the kind of questions that you can ask for surveys. So before we go into that more in-depth part of creating the questions, I do want to cover the type of surveys and first of all, what is a questionnaire? So a questionnaire is the specific set of questions that respondents answer. So let's talk about the advantages of survey first. We talk about the speedy responses. We talk about how it's cost effective. It doesn't cost you a lot of money. We talk about how you can ask these questions to a large number of people and receiving responses quite rapidly. So these are all the elements that make surveys become something that is, very useful and enticing for researchers to use in their research method. And then it says also that with the right sampling method, researchers can make generalizations with a certain level of confidence. And the only reason why we can do that is because there's a lot of samples. The large sample numbers enables us as researchers to be able to say that, oh, this is a generalization that I can make about a specific issue. Now that we have covered the advantages, let's move on to talk about the disadvantages of survey. So one of the disadvantages is the limited understanding of the why behind the numbers. And the reason why it's hard for us to understand why is because the question format. Most of the time, since time is of the essence, and we like to use Survey because we are able to receive prompt response from our respondents, then the kind of questions that we ask tend to be very short questions, either a yes or no, or multiple choice, yeah, or a Likert scale. And so you can ask, for instance, do you agree or disagree with these statements? Or what do you think of this, for instance, this issue from a scale of 0 to 5? Where are you at? So it's harder for you to ask that why question. Why do you think like that? Because then you would have to basically code each one of the reasoning that the respondents were giving you. So that's why most of the time the kind of method, survey method, is usually accompanied by interviews. Because survey, yes, you're able to reach out to large samples, asking many respondents to give you a very quick answers. But when you want to dig deeper and understand the reasoning behind it, then you would actually take maybe a small sample out of your large samples and interview them so that you can have better understanding of the issue. And then the next one is they do not allow us to access causal relationship. And this is something that I have mentioned previously. You can talk about correlation, that there is a correlation between A and B, but you cannot say that there is a causality between A and B. For instance, you can say that how often do you watch TV at home, yeah, or how often do you access Netflix at home, and then you assess your GPA. What is your current GPA? You can say that the longer hours you spend on Netflix or on watching TV at home. And the GPA that you have, that there is correlation, that the more often you watch Netflix, then your GPA may be lower, for instance, or the more hours you spend on watching television, then your GPA may be lower. But we cannot say that watching TV or watching Netflix causes your GPA to be lower. So that's what I meant. You can talk about correlation, but you cannot talk about causality in this case. And then there's this increasing unwillingness of people to participate in the survey. And this reason is because people get busy. You have tons of assignments, you have, work, and then you have relationship with your family, with your partners that you need to maintain. And so most of the time, taking surveys can be quite a hassle, especially if the survey has so many questions. So that's why for this course, when you're designing your second research method project, I really want you to limit the number of questions that you're going to ask. I want you to make sure that you design questionnaires that have only less than 15 questions. And the reason is because we want to address that increasing unwillingness of people to participate in a survey. And then there's these difficulties in deciding whether the responses are valid. One thing that we understand is that people lie all the time, and people want to give a very good impressions when they answer surveys. So it is very hard for us to actually know whether people are telling the truth or not. So this is something that we need to take with a grain of salt when we are receiving all the responses from our respondents. So the next one that I would like to talk about is actually the types of surveys. If we just look at it from the bigger categories, there are only two types of categories for survey. One is what we call as cross-sectional surveys that provide only a snapshot of what is going on at one point in time. So the opposite of cross-sectional studies are longitudinal studies, which track people's changes in knowledge, attitude, or behavior over time. So let's talk about the cross-sectional survey first. The type of survey that you're going to do for your second method project is going to be cross-sectional surveys, because you're going to only ask a question to a group of people about specific issue at a specific time. You are not following them throughout a lengthy period of time and asking the same questions again to them. So if you are actually going to ask the exact same question to them again in next year, and then in 2022 and in 2023 and so on, then you are actually going on the into the longitudinal studies. But for the purpose of this course, we do not need the longitudinal studies. So what you're going to do is just a cross-sectional surveys. Now that we know that in general there are two types of surveys, we are going to go into more detail into the longitudinal studies. So here are some types of longitudinal studies. One is what we call as trend studies, which measure the same items over time, but draw different samples from the population each time. Yeah. So every time you are asking the questions, you're going to ask different people, because you're going to use different samples from your population each time. So if you ask the question right now to these 10 people, and then you ask the same question again next year, but you are recruiting different 10 people because you're going to use different samples. And that's what we call as trend studies. And then we have panel studies which basically retain the same individuals to answer questions over time. So the same individuals are going to be asked the questions, the same questions. So this year, next year, the year after, and all that. That's what we call as panel studies. And then we have a cohort studies, which are long-term and aim at assessing broad shifts in the nature of a populations. Now here, individuals in each sample of a cohort will vary because sampling of the cohort takes place each time the cohort is surveyed. So when we're talking about cohort, think of you as, for instance, class of 2021. So if I want to follow the success of students from class 2021, then I will ask these questions right now, ask you again in the 5 years, and then ask you again in 10 years. But I'm going to actually sample different people within that cohort. And that's what I call as cohort studies. And then the last one is what we call as cross-like surveys, which measure a dependent variable and an independent variable at 2 points in time, and thus allows us to draw conclusions about the causality. Now, it is the only survey design that permits us to assess causality. So, for instance, if I would like to survey children who are playing 3 hours of video games when they are 10 years old, and then see whether that's going to impede or affect their success in the future, then I'm going to actually ask these students in 5 years and then in 10 years, the exact same children, sorry, not students, the exact same children, and see whether their success in the future actually is affected by the amount of video game that they're playing when they're little, all the way to when they're teenagers. And because of this nature of survey, you can actually see the causation between, the two variables of playing video games and the success of later in life. All right, that's going to be the end of my first mini lecture. And I do have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask you to make sure that you have a good understanding of this part of the lecture. Also, I want you to actually watch a TED Talk and determine what kind of survey the scholars are doing in this TED Talk. Hopefully this is a good start for our online class, and whenever you have any questions or concerns, don't forget to email me at putri@colorado.edu, and I'll be there to answer all of your concerns. Thank you.